Welcome to the Ben Gregersen Show. Tonight, I wanted to discuss our government and how our government is funded, because the major ideology of liberalism is that we need to grow government and create this massive government that takes care of everybody and cleans everybody's diapers. Um, but, kind of a nanny state, that takes care of everybody's needs and nobody really has to work or do anything. But I wanted to talk about this because when you create a large government like that, when you grow the government, you actually shrink the private sector. Now, I think anybody who uses their head knows that the private sector funds the government. Where does the government get their money? Well, they get it from you and me. They get it from private businesses. So what happens when you grow the government, and by doing so you shrink the private sector? What's going to pay for all this new government?
Well, what you're talking about is a contract between the private sector and the public sector, whereby the public sector only exists because of the private sector. Go ahead.
Hello, welcome to the Ben Gregersen Show.
Hi, I was just, giving my comments on California being so broke. See, they're so totally being run by the government, and there's very little private sector, so that's why they're so darn broke. The private sector's got to be the driver in the economy, not the government. How come they don't get that?
I have no idea. And California is broke, and a lot of it is because 70% of Californians work for the government.
Yeah.
Which means there's not much of a private sector there that's paying for all their new government.
No, the bigger the government, the worse the economy is.
Well, and one of the problems too is the public employee unions. Unions were never created for government. They were created for businesses and corporations so that workers could get fair treatment by their employers and therefore hold in check the power of those who could withhold their pay or overwork them and those sorts of things. Once you give all the workers in California, the government employees, a union, they have an unending power in order to extract the public money in order to give themselves raises. And what happens is the government grows and gets bigger and bigger, and the unions get more powerful, and the private citizen no longer has any voice. He loses his voice as far as being in the government.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Obama's plan is to break the country, so everything he supports has us in a disastrous economy. The big government is, the answer for everything for him.
Yeah, that's true, and that's the sad part about it is because Obama, while he's growing the government, he's shrinking the private sector. Yeah. So what's going to pay for all this new government? I mean, look at healthcare. Healthcare is a major part of the private sector, and now it's becoming a public institution. The government is taking over healthcare.
Yeah.
So now you got another section of the private sector that is turning into a federal bureaucracy. But like I said, what's going to pay for all this new government? I mean, the private sector funds the government.
Well, I'll tell you what they're doing to pay for it is they keep borrowing more and more money from the Fed and putting us further and further in debt until we're now $17 trillion in debt, which is more debt than we have stacked up since George Washington. In just the years that Obama's been in office, we've stacked up.
How does Idaho stack up in this?
Idaho's not doing too bad because we have what is called a balanced budget amendment. In other words, by law, the state cannot spend more than it takes in. Therefore, they're forced by law to not go out and borrow money to pay for the public employees or the state workers or those people that extract from the private sector in taxes. They can't go beyond those bounds. But now when you see these states like Arizona, California and New York, who don't have a balanced budget amendment. They just keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. And now California is billions of dollars in debt, and they're bankrupt. And even Chicago, Illinois, or was it Detroit, is completely bankrupt.
And you know what's funny about Detroit going bankrupt is Barack Obama in the campaign bragged about how he saved Detroit. He saved a GM. He saved the auto industry. And Barack Obama says, I will not let Detroit go bankrupt. Look what I've done to save the automobile industry. Now we look at this whole thing and Detroit's bankrupt now. You know, even after the government takeover of Detroit, you know, it's gone bankrupt. It's been an utter failure. You know, Obama's been a failure.
Well, getting back to Idaho, I think Idaho is supposed to be, I think I heard about the 25th on the economy compared to some of the other nations or the other states, which is pretty good for. I mean, it's not as bad as it could be. So Idaho's doing fairly good.
Well, we haven't totally given in, but we're still on the same path that all these other states are on. I mean, just like Pocatello, if we keep growing the city government and keep adding employees, and yet we keep losing jobs in the private sector, eventually you're going to get to a point where there's an imbalance. In fact, I think we're already there. We're for the past few years, I think they've been borrowing money to fix the streets, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
Not so much under Bladd, but under the administration before, you've seen a lot of money going out, being borrowed, and a lot of money being owed by the city. And the concern, you know, has been how do we pay for all the retirements of these firemen and these policemen, which are essentially a sacred promise to those folks once they've served and given their lives to protect us, you know, as police and firemen. We don't want to cut them off. But yet, if we're not careful, if we don't, you know, carefully make sure that the private sector is growing all the time by keeping the taxes low, by allowing and subsidizing the private sector to grow, eventually that is going to get out of balance, and we're going to wind up just like California, and that's the concern. That's why
New York City.
Yeah, that's why we're trying to get conservatives into the city council, get some of those folks out of there like Gary Moore, who continually raises taxes.
So what can they do about all these retirements? I mean, look at New York. I mean, they've got so many people on retirement that they can't afford them.
Well, that's the thing. It's if you can keep the government in balance, you can keep the private sector booming, you can take care of those issues. But then you have a downturn in the economy like what happened a few years ago, 2008, where the stock market crashes and businesses die and people get laid off by the millions. Then a man who doesn't have a job cannot pay taxes. And if he doesn't pay taxes, there's nobody who's going to pay the policemen, the firemen, the politicians who take care of the economy. If the private sector isn't held up and powerful and booming economically, you're going to lose your balance, and then they're going to wind up borrowing you into a hole, and that's what's happening. You know, if I can make it simple enough, it's kind of complex. Well,
yeah.
Go ahead, Ben.
Well, this is why liberalism doesn't work. I mean, they shrink the private sector and they grow the government, and there isn't enough money coming in to pay for all the new government that they're creating.
Yep.
You know, it just doesn't work. It doesn't mathematically work. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, why would you grow the government and shrink the mechanism that pays for the government? It doesn't make any logical sense at all. In fact, I don't think liberalism is logical. I never have.
It's where you kill the goose that lays the golden eggs.
It's true. Exactly. Well,
I appreciate your thoughts on it.
yeah. Well, thank you for calling.
You betcha. Okay. Interesting. Bye-bye.
Have a good night. Bye.
Well, and people out there thinking, aren't they, Ben? When she calls, she's thinking about this. Well, this isn't logical.
Yeah.
Why are you doing this? Why are you electing people that are going to do this?
I don't know. I guess people like having the government wiping their diapers and changing their diapers and stuff. I don't know. They like that. They'd rather let the government do it than take care of themselves, which is kind of sad, you know.
Well, I don't just fault those people that, you know, are trying to get out of work. There is a group of people that take advantage of the system and welfare, and there's no question about it. Like that guy in California that, you know, all he does is surf all day on the beach and chase girls, and he gets all of it food stamps free. And
The Obama phone woman.
yeah,
I'm voting for Obama because he's giving me a free phone.
yeah,
An Obama phone.
yeah. We see people like that. There are a lot of people that need the government, and people that can't work, and elderly. We got to make sure that those people are a priority. But
Well,
by
that's-
golly, what's going to happen if we get to $20 trillion, $30 trillion, and this thing busts? I mean, you know, physically, it's just like a balloon. You can only put so much air in a balloon until the walls get thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner until eventually pop, it blows. Just like what happened in Greece.
Absolutely.
And you know, in Greece, here's a good example of our country going down that same path. They showed pictures on Fox News of people in beautiful suits who were once wealthy workers in the government. People who had worked in the city offices were out in garbage dumps, dumpster diving, looking for food in the garbage,
Yeah, that's terrible.
in nice suits. And it didn't take that many years to get to that point where it was a bust.
Yeah, that's terrible. Hopefully, I don't know. I hope we never see that in this country, but I think things are going in that direction.
Well, if people are educated, we can stop it. We can wake people up.
Yeah. Now, I want to make it clear that the message here is not getting rid of welfare. It's helping people get out of welfare. See, the success of welfare should not be determined by how many people are in it, but it should be determined by how many people are getting out of it. See, the problem with welfare right now is people get in it and then they get stuck in it. You know, too many people are permanently getting stuck in welfare, and they lose their work ethic and everything else in the process. Honestly, for me, I've always believed that people that are physically capable and don't have a job, if they're receiving welfare, they should be required to do some sort of community service. They can volunteer for the Red Cross. They can volunteer for a whole host of things. Heck, they could even volunteer to work, you know, in somebody's garden in the community and get that person to signature it. And that person would have done a service to the community. That way they're not getting something for nothing. And they're not losing their work ethic. And I don't know, how many people do you know that want to do community service for the rest of their life?
Now they get tired of it and they'd want a real job.
Yeah, it's a great motivator to get people back to work and to get people back in the workforce. I mean, who knows? You know, somebody doing community service could go and do community service for an actual business. And who knows, that boss there might be like, man, this guy is a good worker, and hire that person for a job. You know, and it just started out as that person, you know, volunteering, you know, just so he could get his welfare
and what you're
check.
saying makes a lot of sense, because unless a body's in motion, it can't be steered in the right direction. Nobody can steer a parked car.
Yeah.
You got to get that car at least moving, and then you can steer it this way, that way, or left, right, forward, and you go somewhere.
Yeah.
But if you're a parked car, nobody can steer a parked car.
Yep.
And that's what happens to people, is they become parked cars.
Uh-huh. See, what I want is a welfare system that helps people get out of welfare. You know, it builds them up and helps them get out of the hole they're in. But right now, our welfare system, there's a ditch, and people are in this ditch. But it's like the government is just throwing a piece of chicken in there to keep people happy. You know, to keep people happy with where they're at, happy with being in that ditch. You know, it's not helping them get out of the ditch. It's just helping them cope with being in the ditch. And I'm saying, no, it shouldn't work that way. The success of welfare should not be determined by how many people are in it, but by how many people are getting out of it. And I believe that if we cut taxes and grow the economy, and as we grow the private sector, there's going to be less people in poverty. There's going to be less people on welfare. That's going to help lift people out of poverty.
But suppose, Ben, you have people who used to call themselves Democrats and now they're socialists. And that's not their plan. Their plan is to get people more and more dependent on government. Like, they have agencies now that go out and advertise to get people on food stamps, advertise to get people on benefits. You know, come down here and we'll sign you up. They're actually soliciting people to do this. They know that if they grow the base of government dependency bigger and bigger and bigger, and then the government and those people in government are empowered by this. This keeps them in office. They now have ready-made voters that'll keep them sustained in office, and we'll never be able to get rid of those kinds of people once they get in. Because once they seize power and grab power, they're not going to let go of it. But they actually gain and attract this power by helping us become dependent. When we become dependent on them, this empowers them and makes them bigger and more important, and helps them hold on to their power. And the United States Constitution is designed to make the government small and the individual big.
That's true. The Constitution begins with the words, "We the people," meaning our government is ran by we the people. We have more power than our government does. You know, our government...
Not anymore.
Our government works for us. We don't work for our government.
See, that's reversed. And we have people in there who are diametrically opposed to the private sector having power. That's what's happening.
It's true. That's why they're stepping on the Constitution.
Yep.
You know, and it's a terrible thing. But I think that we should... Let's move on.
Let's move on.
We'll move on to another subject here. Today you may have heard on the news about Syria, and the Syrian government has been using WMDs, biological and chemical weapons, on their own people. Now the question that's hanging out there is, well, where did the Syrian government get the WMDs? You know, it seems like we had no idea that Syria had WMDs until, you know...
They started using them.
Until they started using them on their own people. So where did they come from? And I'd like to show you a video. And this is from one of Saddam Hussein's top military advisors. And two of Saddam Hussein's top military advisors said that Saddam Hussein moved his WMDs into Syria just weeks before the war. And there were still weapons being moved in there just days before the war, just days before the United States invaded. And James Clapper, who is now part of the Obama administration, he actually was, at the time, he monitored the satellites that take pictures and stuff. Mm-hmm. And on these satellites, he captured footage of unmarked videos shipping something big into Syria. All these vehicles were going over the border into Syria.
Trucks, big trucks.
Big trucks and helicopters, and they were just going into Syria. And, you know, he didn't know what they were loading, but he said at the time that he thought it was Saddam's WMD program.
Well, they showed at the United Nations.
Tell you that story. First, he was one of Saddam Hussein's top military advisors and the only man to disagree with the dictator and live to tell about it. Now, Iraqi General George Asada is breaking his silence with a new book, Saddam's Secrets: How an Iraqi General Defied and Survived Saddam Hussein. He joins us for an exclusive interview tonight. General, when did you come to the United States?
Well, I came 2 weeks ago.
But up to that point, you were in Iraq.
Yes, I was in Iraq.
And you were Saddam Hussein's top military advisor.
Yes, I was number 2 in the Air Force.
And how many years did you work under him?
Well, since the revolution of 1968.
From the beginning?
Yeah, I was retired in '86, and then I was recalled again when Iraq invaded Kuwait.
Yeah. You reveal in this book, there's been so much discussion about weapons of mass destruction, whether they had them, where they were stored, how they got rid of them when when it came time for the United States to invade, and where are they now? You answer these questions.
Well, I want to make it clear, very clear to everybody in the world that we had the weapon of mass destruction in Iraq, and the regime used them against our Iraqi people. It was used against Kurds in the north,
right,
against Arab marsh Arabs in the
but
south.
Some people say they were destroyed. Did we still have them leading up to this invasion?
No, we had a very good organization that Saddam was created to show some of them, but to continue hide.
So we had them.
Yes.
Where were they, and were they moved and where?
Well, up to year 2002, 2002 in summer of your theory, they were in Iraq. And after that, when Saddam realized that the inspectors are coming on 1st of November and the Americans are coming, so he took the advantage of a natural disaster happened in Syria. A dam was broken, so he announced to the world that he's going to make an air bridge.
You know for a fact he moved these weapons to Syria.
Yes.
How do you know that?
I know it because I have got the captains of the Iraq Airways. They are my friend, and they told me that these weapons of mass destruction have been moved to Syria.
How did he move them, General? How were they moved?
They were moved by air and by ground. 56 sorties by Jumbo 747 and 27 were moved to, after they were converted to cargo aircraft, they were moved to Syria.
So I assume this would not have happened without the permission of Damascus, is that correct?
Well, of course, you know, when the aircraft will land in Syria, they must have some sort of agreement between the two.
So the Syrian government knows exactly where these weapons are today?
I think so, because I am sure that these weapons have landed in Damascus, where they have gone.
Okay, let me ask you a question. This may be a little tough, but I have to ask you this, General. You talked about the use of these weapons, and it's been documented, a horrible use of them. And you were in the military during that time.
Yeah.
Do you have any personal regrets? Well, I mean, your military used these weapons, correct?
Yes.
And you were
Iraq
part of that.
them.
Yeah, and you were part of that military. So
Well,
I guess my question is, do you now feel a great deal of regret for having used the weapons?
Yes, of course. The Iraq have used that weapons. It was a great crime, and especially when it was used against our people, Kurd in the north and Arabs in the marsh area.
And during the 8-year Iranian war, it was used against Iranians as well.
Yes,
right?
to be very frank, it was used when the Iranians used to penetrate our defenses
Now,
in our territories.
Do the Iranians have chemical weapons of mass destruction as well?
Well, I cannot tell, but as you know, they are building now the nuclear project.
Last question for you. Did Saddam Hussein have a nuclear weapon capability? Was he moving towards it? And if so, when would he have had it if the United States had not invaded?
Well, you see, Iraq had some projects for nuclear weapons, but it was destroyed in 1981.
So there was no chance there were nuclear weapons or on their way to nuclear weapons when we invaded?
Not in Iraq.
Okay.
Hey, let me ask you about this. You described this conversation that you have with Saddam Hussein and your disagreement with him.
Yeah.
Not many people got to disagree with Saddam Hussein and live to tell about it.
Yes.
What happened?
Yes, actually, I had many times I have disagreed with Saddam Hussein in many things, and for some reason he used to believe me. And he used to listen to me.
Yeah.
And thanks God that in the last war, we were supposed to attack Israel by 98 aircraft, all equipped with nuclear chemical weapons in 2 waves. One wave through Jordan and the other wave through Syria, without telling Syrians and Jordan about that. But I mentioned to the president, sir, this is going to be a disaster because Israelis have got plans to destroy these airplanes before they go to Israel. Although whatever air defenses are good, but still some aircraft can penetrate.
Was he an evil man?
Well, I think to a certain degree, yes, he was.
All right, thank you for sharing that. Wonder if the mainstream media will pick up on your comments. Appreciate you being with us. And coming up tonight, the town of
Well, that's very interesting, Ben. That hasn't really come out on the news very much. I think that ought to permeate every news story in the country. For 10 years, we were told that there was no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Well, Saddam Hussein used those weapons of mass destruction on his own people, used them in the Persian Gulf War. Weapons inspectors from the UN went in there to inspect Iraq for the WMDs, and Saddam threw them out. He wouldn't let them go in there and look. And that's very suspicious, you know.
It is.
Then you got two of Saddam's top, I mean, that's only one of them, but two of Saddam's top advisors have said that the weapons were shipped to Syria. And it's very interesting now that there's WMDs that are popping up in Syria, and I'd be willing to bet that they're Saddam's.
Well, and talk about 9/11. We now know that Iraq had financed the first attack on the World Trade Center. You know, in 1993, they tried to blow up the Trade Center, and they set a bomb in the basement.
Well, that's true. One of the bombers was an Iraqi. He had an Iraqi visa. He had a visa from Iraq. You know, one of the.
So what was happening is Saddam was trying to get even with the United States by attacking the World Trade Center, even back then, because of Desert Storm. Anybody that did anything to offend Saddam, he got even with them. But he was afraid of the United States, and so he solicited terrorists and bin Laden to do his dirty work for him.
Well,
and that's where the money came from.
Absolutely. He even financed Al-Qaeda at one point to kill off.
Al-Qaeda became part of his country.
Well, that's true. But to kill off Bush Sr.
Yeah.
Bush Sr. was making a visit to the Middle East, and there was an assassination attempt made on Bush Sr.'s life, where Saddam had actually funded terrorists to kill Bush Sr. Now, when the war on terror started, you know, President Bush, he said at the time that we would go after any country that harbors and supports terrorism.
Yeah.
So if that country aids and embeds terrorism, we're going after them. And that was what the Bush doctrine was, is we're going to stop these, we're going to go after these countries that are financing terrorism.
The only problem I have with it is they should have got the UN out of it, because they put so many stipulations on our troops that they couldn't get the job done in a hurry. And we got stuck there too long. And that's where the war became unpopular. But that's because we were so entangled with the UN. And when you have to fight a war under their conditions and under their bylaws, you just can't win. It's just like Vietnam. It goes on, and we're not allowed to win the war.
Yeah.
And I think that I think the intention was good to stop him.
Although I think we did win the war, though, because Saddam no longer is in power, and that corrupt government that supported terrorism is no longer in power.
Yeah.
If you think about it, the bad guys never gained their power back in Iraq after we, went in there and kicked the bad guys out. I mean, they fought and fought and fought and tried hard to get the government back, but they were never able to gain control.
There's still
of the
a lot of
government
problems on Iraq, but it's still functioning as a democracy right now. 80-90% of the people go out and vote. We can't get that in the United States. We can't get people to vote like that, like they do in Iraq.
Yeah,
so those people they don't want Sharia law. They voted that out. They want a democracy. They want a republic like we have in the United States.
In fact, they're one of the only, actually they are the only democracy in the Middle East besides Israel. You've got Israel and you've got Iraq. That's it.